Hi, I'm Lori Palatnik. I'm a very observant woman who is the director of the Jewish Women's Renaissance Project. It's like a Taglit Imahot. I head an organization that brings thousands of women to Israel from 19 different countries. It's a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, but I didn't grow up this way. I didn't grow up keeping Shabbat. I didn't grow up caring about Judaism. I didn't grow up even thinking I was going to marry somebody Jewish. I grew up classically Jewish. How did this happen? What does classically Jewish mean? Well, I grew up in Toronto, in Canada, and I knew I was Jewish. My brothers had bar mitzvahs, but there were more bar than mitzvah. Do you understand? We went to after-school Hebrew school. I didn't go to Jewish schools, but after school, twice a week, we would go to the local synagogue, and we would have classes. We hated it. We called it Jew jail. It was like a sentence. We couldn't wait to get out of it. So how did I go from that upbringing to who I am today? Well, it's a journey, and everybody is on a journey. The story goes as follows. There are 4 kids in my family. My youngest sister, Miriam, who also went to public schools, she seemed like overnight, she became Shomer Shabbat. Again, if you would have listed all the crazy things that could have happened in our family, this wouldn't have even made the list. It seemed like one minute she was into Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the next minute she was into Shabbat. What happened? My mother encouraged her when she was younger, when she was in high school, to get more social skills, and she joined BBYO, which is a Jewish youth group, but it's not observant or religious at all. My sister joined, and that year, 2 young rabbis convinced B'nai B'rith to let them go in and give these Jewish kids some Jewish content. Well, they gave them some content, all right. They gave them so much content in such a vibrant way that the whole group of kids got turned on to Judaism, and they became Shomer Shabbat. Now, the parents went crazy. Why? Because they wanted their kids to be Jewish, but not too Jewish. And that's Judaism in North America. Be Jewish, but not too Jewish. So my sister went through her journey. On every Friday, she would go off somewhere for Shabbat in Toronto and come back. She stopped wearing jeans. She started wearing skirts. And before we knew it, she graduated high school. And instead of going off to college, these rabbis convinced my parents she should go to Israel. She should go to Israel and go to a seminary to study. Somehow they convinced my parents, and off she went. Now, I was going along in my life, and I was graduating from college in communications, and I started working in radio. And my sister was writing me these letters, about she's going to be the queen of her kitchen and not a slave to it, and there was all these Hebrew words, and there was a glossary, and I was like, just, Miriam, stop writing me. Thank you very much. My life, if you looked at the magazines, I was a woman of the 80s. I was successful in my career, I was successful socially, and I really had it all. But there were moments, for sure, late at night, that I would look out at the sun setting, and I was thinking, this is nice, but is this it? Then I'll get married and have children, and then I'll die, and in between I'll buy a house, watch TV, have a dog. That's it? Okay, it's nice, but there was a sense that maybe there's more. But I didn't think there was more in any way spiritually. I just kind of felt a little disappointed. Is this all there is? My sister came back from Israel, very religious, and I have to tell you that turning point in my life at this point started with a Christmas commercial, because I was working in radio. I was a copywriter. I wrote commercials, and very early on in my career, I won a national award for a Christmas commercial that I wrote. So I found myself at the top of the CN Tower and getting this award, and I was getting all these offers to move to a major market. So what did I do? I quit my job, I got a backpack, and I was off to Europe. Now, I have to tell you, people my age at that time, this was the 80s, this was not the 60s and 70s, my friends were not going off to Europe and backpacking, they were going back to university to get their MBAs. But my mother raised us with a lot of art and culture growing up, and I just felt, I wanted to see the world. I wanted to see the Mona Lisa and the Pissarro and the Renoir. I didn't just want to see them in a book. I wanted to see the world. I had my degree. I had my award. I'm not married. I don't have a mortgage. This is my time. So off I went. But before I went, I went to see my friends and my family, and I have to tell you, I didn't know when I was coming back. I thought, maybe I'll be a writer in Ireland. Writers don't pay taxes there. And I just had all these dreams of adventure. So I spent time with people, and I said to my sister Miriam, let's go out, and have a coffee or something before I leave, because I don't know when I'm coming back. So she says, why don't you spend Shabbat with me? I said, Miriam, I'm not spending Shabbat with you. She goes, no, please, spend Shabbat with me. I said, Miriam, I'm not spending Shabbat with you. She goes, if you really loved me, you would spend Shabbat with me. Okay, fine, I'll spend Shabbat with you. So one Shabbat, my first Shabbat, this is my first Shabbat, you ready? Okay, so my sister plans this whole Shabbat. She knew this was this is it. I go with her to the religious part of Toronto, and she picked a woman for us to stay with, our host, who was a professional, because I was very into my career. I remember speaking to her for 2 minutes, and in my mind, I was thinking, I don't relate to this woman. Great, I don't have to be religious, which is so open-minded of us, all right? But I have to tell you, that's where I was at. What are my memories of the first Shabbat? Well, first of all, they were eating all the time, okay? It was just a little bit much for me. And Friday night, I remember being at this table of this rabbi, and they had all these other rabbis there, and there was this whole Shabbaton going on, and there was another guy there. It was his first Shabbat, and we just kept rolling our eyes at each other. I was basically mocking everything. I was very badafka. I was just I got A for attitude. Remember, they told me, now we're going to wash al nitilat yadayim in preparation for the challah, and they said, and after you wash, don't speak. So I remember washing, and I remember speaking on purpose and going, oops, really A for attitude, okay? So, and I remember asking questions, not because I wanted the answers, because I just had attitude. And I remember saying at one point to the rabbi, yeah, well, what about this? And he said, oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm going to look into it and find out. I'll get back to you. What? When I grew up, the rabbi, who I only saw twice a year, up on the stage, closer to God than us, if you asked him a question, for sure he'd have the answer. You would never ask him a question, but if he did, he would have the answer. And suddenly, this rabbi said, I don't know. I'll look into it, and I'll get back to you. That really struck me. He's a real person. That was very respectful, what he said. Okay. The next day, I remember the next day, my sister brought me to a synagogue, a Beit Knesset, and I don't know which one it was, but it was the wrong one. They had a mechitza that was like the Great Wall of China. Do you understand? All right? And I was raised with a lot of feminist ideals, and I'm fuming, okay? I'm sitting there, I don't know what the heck is going on, and this wall, and I wanted to stand up and say, ladies, follow me, we're gonna knock this thing down. But I didn't. I just sat and got angry. We went back to our host to eat again, and after lunch, I said to my sister, because I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was so claustrophobic in this world. And I said, Miriam, I'm leaving. She goes, but Shabbat isn't over yet. I go, Miriam, this is nice for you, but it's not for me. I'm leaving. She goes, but Shabbat isn't over. And I'm packing my things up. She's trying to convince me. And I said, Miriam, nice for you, not for me. I get into my car. This is in a very religious neighborhood. I'm backing out. And literally, she's following the car beside me, trying to convince me to stay. And I said, Miriam, read my lips. Nice for you, not for me. And I drove away. And I felt like I escaped from prison. That was my first Shabbat. I go off to Europe. Traveling was beautiful. And under very strange circumstances, I ended up in Israel. I really don't have the time to explain all the crazy things that happened, but I have to tell you, sometimes people ask me, how did you become religious? And I say, God said, you, over here, I got something to talk about. You know what? The Hashgacha Pratit story is so amazing, I'm actually going to tell you. Before I left, my mother gave my father a 50th birthday surprise party. And she gave him a really cool gift, an exotic present for his birthday. It was a cruise down the Nile. Now, in my family, there is an unwritten law: you don't return gifts. All right, somebody gives you a gift, you just say toda, thank you, you don't return them. I married into my husband's family. As they're handing you the gift, they're saying you can return it, okay? But in my family, it's like you get a gift, you say thank you. My mother is very adventurous and very creative and a woman of the world. My father is a homebody. So the only way my mother could get my father out of the house and to do something cool was to give it to him as a gift, because you don't return gifts. So she got him this cruise down the Nile. The last thing my father wanted to do was cruise down the Nile, but he's stuck. My mother figured out, oh my gosh, you are going to be in Europe and we're going to be on this trip at the same time. What if I got you an extra ticket and you could go with? So I'm like, yeah, I'm there. Now we calculated when I was going to meet them in Cairo. So I did my traveling in Europe. Now, you have to understand, this was in the 1980s. There were no cell phones. There was no email. To call home, I'd have to go to a post office and go get an international operator. It was a very big deal. And once a week, I would call home to say I'm alive, and that was it. So it wasn't like I was in contact with them. So now I'm in Greece. I'm in Athens. And I get to the airport to fly to Cairo to meet my parents, as we had arranged. I walk into the airport, and this man comes over to me, and he starts speaking to me in broken English, and I just thought he was being a guy, and I'm like, no, thank you. And I go up to the counter, and I hand in my passport. The woman looks at the passport, and she goes, we've been trying to contact you. Your family's trying to reach you. And she calls this man over, and the man starts yelling at me. I asked you if you were you, and I go, what's going on? They take me aside, and they say, your father has died. Now, my father hadn't died. And the other one says, no, her grandfather died. I'm like, who died? They said, your grandfather died. Your parents were in Amsterdam and had to turn back to go to the funeral. They want you to go on to Israel. The plane is leaving in 30 minutes. Give us your backpack. I'm like, what? I said, listen, first of all, my heart stopped when I thought my father had died. I said, I'm not going anywhere until I talk to my parents. They said, fine. They got me an international operator. They took my bag. They're holding the plane. I call my parents. I can't get through my parents. I can't find my brother. I finally reached my sister-in-law. And my sister-in-law told me that my Zadie had passed away. I go, why do mom and dad want me to go to Israel? Because on this trip through Europe, I had not planned to go to Israel. Not only I wasn't raised observant, I also was not raised Zionistic. We weren't anti-Zionistic, but we knew Israel was there, but I didn't know the words to Hatikva. It just wasn't in my world. So suddenly, I reached my sister-in-law. I told her that, so I said, try to reach, Auntie Sally, my mother's best friend, whose daughter lived in Israel, and if this is the time in Israel, I don't know in Greece, I don't know what time it is in Israel, and it's just like, they hold the plane, I get on the plane takes off. Now I'm emotional. Oh my gosh, I thought but my father died, my grandfather died, and then suddenly I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to Israel. Now, I was very confused about my Judaism. Somewhere between my sister, who was this religious fanatic, and my parents, who gave me as much as they were raised with and a little less, because that's how it's going, somewhere between was me. And I didn't know what that was. I always prided myself to make educated decisions in life, whether I'm going to a college or I'm buying a car. And I was about to make a choice later on in life of who I was going to marry and how I was going to live, and about my Judaism, and I knew I was not making an educated decision. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to land in Israel, and I'm going to get clarity. I'm going to understand my Judaism immediately, because I'm going to be in Israel, right? This is it, the land of our people, okay? The plane lands, and back then, there was no fancy terminal. You actually got off on the tarmac. So I remember getting off on the tarmac, standing on the tarmac, and waited to feel Jewish. And I felt nothing. And somebody with an Uzi told me to move, and I moved, and I went in, and they paged me, and my cousin, okay, my fake cousin, my mother's best friend's daughter, they told me is outside waiting for you. And I said, that's the best news I've heard all day. We had a reunion. She lived in Beersheba, and she said, use our place, her and her husband, as your home base, and go see Israel. Go see Israel. So I did. I traveled around Israel, and at one point I was in the north, and I met up with a girl from Switzerland and her non-Jewish boyfriend, and we traveled together, and we got to Jerusalem. We got to Jerusalem, and again, in my Let's Go Europe, who I planned to be, there was like 6 pages on Israel, and I just looked for a cheap youth hostel. I ended up in an Arab youth hostel in the old city. I didn't know what, and it was a scary place. And I said to them, like, this is a scary place. You know what? Let's just go to the wall. So we did. We went down to the kotel, to the wall, and we followed. I remember it was a cold, rainy night. It was like in the spring, just like winter, spring, and I'm going down, and it was raining, and there was the kotel, all lit up. No one was there because it was raining, except for one man. One man is standing there. And as we're walking to the kotel, I recognized that man. He was one of the rabbis back months before at that Shabbat that I was with my sister. And I went up to him and I said, hi, do you remember me? I'm Lori Zelser and my sister, and I was at that rabbi's. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember you. He goes, where are you staying? I said, at this scary Arab youth hostel. He said, how would you like to stay with a nice couple of girls in Beit Vegan? And so I said to my friend, you know what? I don't know about you, I'm going with him. And he's legit, like I met him in Toronto, like it's cool. So I said, I'm getting out of that. If you want to come with me, and she did, she came with me. And they brought us to these two girls who work at a seminary called Neve Yerushalayim. And it's a place where people, young adults are learning more about their Judaism, taking a second look. And they opened up their home, they gave us a key, and they said, just come and go as you please. So we did. We came and we went. And I remember it was just before Pesach. They were really wonderful people. And they mentioned there was classes at our school. And I said to my friend, I said, you know what? It would make them so happy if we would go to a class at their school. So one night we said to them, we'd like to go to a class at your school. And it made them so happy. So I went to a class. It was the last day before the Pesach break. And I remember walking in like this, waiting for this Mickey Mouse class about how to make fluffy matzo balls. And I sat down, the rabbi walked in, everybody stood up, so I stood up, and then he started teaching about Pesach. And I was blown away. I learned more about Pesach in 1 hour there than I had in 23 years back home. That's not I always felt I was a slave at Pesach because I'm in the kitchen helping my mother. It was about the destiny of the Jewish people. And Pesach is about freedom. Freedom is realizing your potential. And anything that's holding you back from realizing your personal potential, that's the chometz in your life. That's what's enslaving you. And that's what we get rid of at Pesach. I'm taking notes. It was amazing. Afterwards, the rabbi tried to convince me to stay. And I was telling him about the Mechitza and the Great Wall of China and women are second-class citizens. And he said, oh, there's this woman here, Rebbetzin Heller, and she can explain this to you. And I said, fine, because I said, you're a man, I'm not going to hear this from you. And he said, speak to Mrs. Heller. And I said, fine. He goes, yeah, well, right now she's on maternity leave. I go, they're always pregnant, okay? Goodbye. And off I went. I went back to my life in Canada. A year later, I got something in the mail, an opportunity to go back to Israel. And I took it. Because in that year, even though I'm sure it was there all the time, it just seemed like everywhere I looked, it was about Judaism or Israel. I went back, and I fell in love with Israel again. Because the first time I felt like, if I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave. And it didn't make any sense when I came back on this program, because we were not just touring, we were learning. And everything came together. I also felt, if I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave. But this time, I knew why. So I stayed. I slowly became more observant. I still don't relate to my sister and her friends. I found my way. I found my place. I met people who were dancers and actors and doctors, women like me who decided to become observant, and they weren't leaving their talents behind. They were infusing it with meaning and channeling their talents. A year later, I met my husband. And we moved to Canada, where all my children were born. I have 5 children. And now I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I started the Jewish Women's Renaissance Project. That's my journey. Everybody has a journey. And our journey never ends until our last breath. That's my story.